was 19 when the taste of metal bloomed under my tongue. I coughed into my palm and saw a bright smear that didn't belong to youth. Dad squinted at me over the rim of his coffee and said, "Stop faking." I wish I could tell you I laughed it off. I wish I could tell you it was a nosebleed. What happened next will shock you, because 7 months later, the scan lit up like a wildfire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The first smear wasn't dramatic. I was standing by the sink after an early run, sweat damp on my collarbone, the window fogged where the kettle breathed. I coughed, small, almost polite, and a rust-colored streak unfurled in my tissue. The room tilted, a little. My mother, Aylin, looked up from chopping parsley and stilled, knife hovering in the air, eyes searching my face like she could read my lungs the way she read ingredients. "We're going to the clinic," she said. Dad, Kamal, didn't even glance away from his phone. The auction app was open, numbers exciting his thumb the way luck excites gamblers. "She's faking to get out of her shift," he said, and the word faking turned all the way through me like a screw. At 19, I still wanted to be believed by the people who raised me. It's a silly thing, maybe, that kind of wanting. It makes you soften your voice when you should sharpen it, makes you nod when you should say no. I rinsed the sink like a criminal erasing evidence and told myself it was just the dry air, the change in weather, the fact that I ran too hard and swallowed cold air wrong. At urgent care, a physician assistant listened to my chest and pronounced, "My lungs clear." She asked about allergies. She asked about stress. She asked if I vaped, and I shook my head. She squeezed my shoulder, said it was probably a burst capillary. "Keep fluids up, avoid strenuous activity for a couple of days," she said, and her smile was a small practiced mercy. Mom drove us home the long way, the route that passed the river where the cottonwoods made a tunnel of green. She didn't talk much. She pressed a napkin into my hand like she was passing me something sacred. In her silence, there was space for me to breathe, and in that space, I began to notice other things. Things like the way the house smelled when the evenings drew in, bleach, then lemon, then something underneath both that was damp and old. Dad had bought the bungalow 6 months earlier, the third in a row of almost there flips he promised would finally make a profit. The basement was his pride, he said, dry-walled, painted, contractor white, dehumidifiers humming like steady bees. He kept the door locked at first, said there were tools everywhere, and he didn't want us tripping. Later, he said he was fogging for spiders. Later, he said the place needed to air out. The reasons moved like a shell game, and I kept losing track of the ball. In the weeks after the first blood, I coughed more. Not gouts, nothing cinematic. Thread-fine red lines tucked into ordinary tissues. Sore muscles beneath my ribs from the way my body folded in on itself at night. I would wake at 3 a.m. with a weight on my sternum that didn't belong to dreams. I told Mom. She reached for her little notebook as if the act of writing could pin truth to the page. She noted dates, times, how the air felt, what I'd eaten, whether the house was closed up for rain, whether the dehumidifiers were running. "If we have to push for tests, we won't rely on memory," she said. And there was steel in her softness. Dad rolled paint on Saturdays, a roller singing in long strokes. He painted studs. He painted joists. He painted anything that looked like it had a story. "Fresh is good," he said when I asked why he painted what would never show. Fresh sells. He had a way of talking about houses like they were stage sets, like you could fix a foundation with the right lighting. When I coughed at the breakfast table, he lifted an eyebrow the way some people lift a knife. "You want attention?" he said. "Find another way." I took an extra shift at the coffee shop because it felt cleaner to cough among strangers. I wiped the espresso machine in precise circles and blinked the sting from my eyes and wondered if the foam in my chest was made of nothing but fear. After closing, Mom would pick me up in the old Corolla that hummed like a tired hymn. and she would crack both front windows 3 inches, her ritual measure for air. The notebooks, she had started a second by then, lived in her purse between coupons and a photograph of me holding up a trout with both hands the summer I turned 12. Symptoms have a way of teaching you to be careful with language. I stopped saying, "I'm fine," because I wasn't. I stopped saying, "It's nothing," because every time I said it, my body answered back with a cough that made me see stars. I started saying, "It's worse at home." And Mom's hand tightened on the steering wheel like she had been waiting for me to say exactly that. "Do you smell it?" she asked. "Bleach?" Under that. I inhaled with my mouth barely open, the way you inhale when you're trying not to disturb dust. "Like wet cardboard," I said. "Like a gym bag that never dries." She nodded once. "Like old books that caught rain." We told Dad we needed a home inspection. He laughed a real laugh, head back, teeth flashing. "We just painted," he said, like paint was proof of health. No point paying someone to tell us the obvious. The morning. I coughed blood onto my pillowcase. I took the case off and soaked it in the sink before anyone saw. I stood there pressing it down like a sinner, baptizing something she didn't want to confess. Mom knocked once and came in anyway. She didn't gasp. She didn't scold me for hiding it. She took the pillowcase from my hands, folded it like an altar cloth, and said, "We're done asking. We're going to the big hospital." At County General, the triage nurse looked at my age and stamped me young in her mind. The resident who read my chest x-ray frowned at shadows that weren't dramatic enough to tell a story. My oxygen was okay. My pulse was quick. The part of the system that worries only when numbers threaten to blink red did not worry about me. "Probable bronchitis," the resident said, and he wrote antibiotics on a pad without looking at me. "Hydrate," he said. "Rest." Dad, who had shown up late carrying a tape measure for no reason at all, looked vindicated by the prescription, paper in the doctor's hand. In the parking garage, Mom leaned against the Corolla and let herself cry the way the rain lets itself fall. Quiet. Inevitable. "We'll keep going," she said into my hair. "We'll keep asking. I don't care how many rooms we have to walk into before someone listens." At home, the basement door stood ajar for once, and the air that rose through the gap was cool and wrong, like the breath of someone who'd been hiding. Inside, 2 dehumidifiers blinked their little green eyes. The concrete floor looked dry as good manners. Dad had draped plastic over stacks of wood and taped the seams neat. He'd painted the posts again. You could tell because the roller still leaned against the wall, leaving a damp kiss on the plastic like a signature. "Why paint when no one's going to see it?" I asked. "Because buyers ask about basements," he said, annoyed that I didn't speak his language. "Because we had that rain in April. Because the last tenant never ran the fan. Because fresh sells." "Fresh doesn't fix rot," Mom said, and the room chilled around her voice. Dad looked at her like she had stepped out of line in a dance he was leading. "You want this place to hold value or you want to flush it?" he said, and stepped around us to unplug one of the dehumidifiers. "Electricity isn't free." The cough made a home of me. Some days it laid quiet like a cat in the sun. Some days it clawed. I learned how to talk around it at school, how to swallow against the urge. I stopped running. I stopped singing with the radio. I stopped making jokes that needed breath to land. 7 months after the first smear, I lay inside. A machine that sounded like a spaceship eating coins. The pet CT tech had wrapped my arm with a tourniquet and injected something that glowed. "It's sugar your body can see," she said, and I watched the numbers tick down on a little machine and imagined the way my cells would light like towns. On a map night can't hide. When the report landed, it didn't say the words anyone wants. It said increased uptake. It said mediastinal and hilar nodes. It said possible neoplastic process. I learned those phrases the way people learn the lines of hymns when they're not sure what else to say. The oncologist was kind enough. He said words like rule out and differential, words that are supposed to be comforting because they are careful. Mom held my hand so tight the IV tape wrinkled. Dad's jaw did a strange thing, like anger was chewing on it from the inside. Scans make mistakes, he said. Machines make mistakes. She's 19. The only time the word 19 ever sounded like an insult was when he said it that way, like youth was a trick I was playing. Mom took a breath like she was about to dive. "We're not arguing with the report," she said. "We're going to figure out why it looks like that." We didn't sue. People like to imagine all stories end in court because court feels like a machine that stamps things official. We filed an insurance claim. We filed the county report. We filed a claim with the Sellers Disclosure Board because the sellers, one of them a friend of Dad's, had answered no to water questions with an ease that didn't belong to truth. There were long phone calls and long waits and emails that hid responsibility under words like processing and review. There was a settlement eventually, and money isn't health, but it paid the crew who tore sickness out of our walls, and it paid for a small rental on the other side of town where the air didn't make my chest bloom wrong. Dad came to the rental once with a plastic bin of my books. He set the bin inside the doorway and stood there like a boy who'd been asked to apologize in front of the class. "I didn't know it would hurt you," he said, and the words were almost right, but not the ones I needed. "You knew there was water," I said. "You knew what you did to hide it. You didn't know it would hurt you. That's the part you meant." He looked at the floor, and then at Mom, and then at me, and found nowhere to put his eyes that would make him comfortable. "I wanted to sell," he said. "I wanted us ahead for once." He said us like it could cover every choice. He said ahead like money is a direction and not a condition. "I wanted to breathe," I said. "I still do." He nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a bend where there had only been brick. He left without hugging me. The bin looked too full for the smallness of the room, and I sorted the books by which ones smelled like home and which ones still held a whisper of paint. I threw out two I loved for the way they made my throat prickle. Grief is practical sometimes. Recovery isn't a montage. It's boring and holy and long. I took steroids that made me feel like someone else was driving, my body. I took antifungals that made metal taste like a habit. I took my temperature and my pulse and my courage in equal measures. I coughed less. I slept more. The PET follow-up months later didn't light like a fire. It glowed like a city far away. The kind of light that tells you people are still living. But they're quiet now. Mom kept the notebooks even after I told her we didn't need to write every breath anymore. She pressed them flat with both hands as if she were blessing them. "Sometimes you keep records not for court," she said, "but for the part of your heart that will doubt itself later." We moved back to the house only after the monitors, stayed low for weeks, after the sump pump gurgled like a small animal that meant well, after the gutters ran water away like good manners. We put a chair by the east window where the maple throws morning like confetti. I sat there with tea and inhaled like I was relearning a language I used to speak without thinking. You can hear clean air. It sounds like nothing and everything, at once. Neighbors are the kind of chorus you don't always want, but sometimes they sing the right line. Mrs. Ortiz from 2 doors down brought a plate of lemon cookies and, without knowing the saga, mentioned, "Last spring, the man before, you kept pumping water out for weeks. Poor guy, those storms." Her kindness wasn't an indictment, it was context. She told us what the disclosure forms hadn't. She told us what Dad had been busy painting over. I don't hate him. Hate is the kind of mold that grows in the dark, when you don't open a window. I drew a line instead. It was straight and unadorned, and it ran right through the middle of our life. On one side, love that protects. On the other, love that performs. I asked him which side he wanted to live on. He didn't answer that day, but he stopped saying faking. And sometimes the absence of a cruelty is the first kindness a person can manage. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. In the quiet after crisis, people will ask, "So what did you learn?" Like trauma is a worksheet to be graded. I didn't learn something neat. I learned to believe the small red fleck in a tissue even when the room insists on lyricizing it away. I learned that concrete wicks water the way worry wicks strength. I learned that some men think paint is a sacrament. I learned that some mothers keep little notebooks that save their children. I printed the lab report and the pet report and the county inspector's notes and put them in a blue folder with my name on the tab. I didn't do it so I could show anyone. I did it because owning my story felt like the opposite of being erased by someone else's version of events. When I hesitated to email the seller's board, because who am I to make trouble? Because what if they say it's nothing? Because what if I'm being dramatic? Mom opened her palm like a stage and said, "Put your fear here." I set the phone in her hand and she pressed send without speechifying it. On a Saturday in late autumn, after the trees had unclasped their leaves and the air smelled faintly of iron from the first frost, I met the AC tech at a diner because I wanted to look in the face of the man who had named the air in our house. He ordered coffee. I ordered pancakes I barely touched. "You did right," he said, as if he had heard my doubt breathing across the table. "Lots of folks ignore it because it's inconvenient. Lots of folks wait for worse." He took a pen and drew me a diagram of a basement, arrows for airflow, a little cartoon of a dehumidifier that made me laugh for the first time in a week. "Dry is not the same as safe," he said. "Remember that." I printed a photograph Mom had taken of me the day the negative air machines rolled out. I am standing at the east window. My hair is up. My sweatshirt is the one with paint freckles. I never managed to wash out. I'm smiling, not the performative smile you give the world, but the private one you give a room when the room finally gives you back your own breath. I taped the picture inside the blue folder. Evidence of recovery belongs with evidence of harm. One evening, Dad knocked on the door. He'd started knocking, which was new, and asked if he could come in. He stood in the foyer like a man who'd forgotten how to enter houses. "Do you still have that recording?" he asked without looking at me. "Yes," I said. He nodded, as if that answer allowed him to step onto a different square in a game he was trying to replay with new rules. "I told the buyer about the water on the duplex," he said. "He walked. He stopped. His face worked like old machinery. "I'm going to fix it right. I'm going to fix this right." He gestured vaguely, and for the first time in months I believed him enough to imagine he might mean more than walls. "Good," I said. "Good." It wasn't reconciliation. It was alignment. A small degree shift that would, over miles, change the horizon. At 19, I thought, survival would make me hard in the way I saw hardness portrayed in movies, the brittle kind that shatters sharp. Instead, it made me porous in the ways that matter and firm in the ways that protect. I became someone who opens windows at the first hint of damp. Someone who asks the second question when the first answer is too tidy. Someone who keeps a copy of her medical records and her own name on the tab. What I want to tell you, if you're listening with the taste of metal in your mouth or the weight of doubt on your chest, is that your body is not a liar. Even if someone you love tells you it is, especially then. I want to tell you that paint is not a cure, that fresh smell is a costume, that appearances are often the last thing to know the truth. I want to tell you that the quiet strength of a mother at a kitchen table, pen moving like prayer across a page, is an instrument more precise than any machine. I still run, slower now, and with more attention to air. The first morning I took the path by the river again. The cottonwoods had gone bare, and the water carried the dull gleam of winter. I coughed twice, and nothing red came. I stopped and cried as if someone had handed me back a season I'd thought I lost. A man walking a dog paused like he thought I might be hurt. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm okay." And for once, the sentence was true the moment it left my mouth. At home, Mom made tea, and we sat by the east window until the maple let the light in fully. She placed her notebooks on the sill and closed them with a soft thump. "We keep them," she said, "but we don't live inside them." She reached for my hand and I let her hold it. A simple, ordinary tether, in a world that had felt unmoored. As for Dad, we are learning each other from a different distance. He asks before he replaces a faucet now, and it sounds ridiculous to write that as a milestone, but consent is made of small questions. He lets inspectors do their work without performing at them. He says, "I don't know," and the room doesn't collapse. He says, "I'm sorry," and it lands not like a tool, but like a truth. I don't trust easily yet, but trust is not a light switch. It's a dimmer. And lately I've noticed the room isn't as dark. The scan that once lit like a wildfire sits in a folder in a drawer I don't open every day. When I do open it, I don't shudder. I nod to the girl who lay inside a machine and learned to marry fear to fact. I whisper to her in the language we both now understand. We made it. Not by pretending, by proving, not by pleasing, by breathing. If you made it this far with me, if there's a part of you that recognizes the smell beneath the bleach, I hope you feel less alone. The worst part of being doubted is how it teaches you to doubt yourself. The best part of surviving is how it returns you to your own voice. Mine is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It is steady now. It is mine. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. I didn't sleep much that week. When I closed my eyes, the machine's tunnel became a throat swallowing me whole. At 3 a.m., I went to the kitchen for water and found Mom at the table with her notebooks open. She'd drawn a grid that turned my life into rows. Date, time, where I was, how long I'd been there. When I coughed, how much. She had circled the days we'd spent the most time in the house and drawn a line through the days we'd stayed at my aunt's. "Do you see it?" she asked. The circles made a pattern even my fear could read. The worst days were house days. The almost normal days were out-of-the-house days. The week we slept on Aunt Selma's couches while the plumber finished something in the basement had been my best week in months. "I need to prove it to someone who doesn't love you," Mom said. "Because I love you, and they're going to say love makes me biased." She made a call with her voice pitched casually bright and scheduled what she called an AC tune-up. She paid cash. She told Dad it had been a Groupon. The man who arrived wore a polo with a company logo and carried a tool bag heavy enough to make his arm drag an inch lower. He was in his 40s, with the tired competence of someone who has spent his life inside other people's problems. He looked at the furnace. He looked at the vents. He looked at the crawlspace hatch Dad liked to pretend was decorative. "You've got negative pressure when the dehumidifiers run," he said. "Could be drawing air from the walls." Dad said, "Air is air." The tech gave him the long look you give someone who doesn't know the difference between a ladder and a ledge. He pulled 2 little cassettes out of his bag and clipped them to a tripod. "Spore traps," he said to Mom, not to Dad. "I'll run one upstairs and one near the basement door. Lab will tell us what's flying around." Dad's laugh sounded like sheet metal. "My house is clean," he said. "Clean isn't the same as dry," the man said, and left with the cassettes tucked into a padded case like small sleeping animals. We waited. Waiting is a job people don't respect enough. It takes stamina to sit still while your mind tries to run. Mom cooked rice and carrots because they didn't steam the air with anything heavy. She opened the windows exact inches even, when the sky threatened rain. She washed pillowcases like she was laundering the past. She kept her notebooks close and bought a third when the second filled. Dad stayed late at the other place, a duplex he was sanding for a buyer who said he liked rustic and meant cheap. He came home with paint under his nails and silence under his tongue. When the lab report hit Mom's inbox, it began with numbers that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't learned to translate. It used words like spores, MM3, and listed genera in a column that might as well have been a poem if it weren't a threat. Aspergillus, penicillium-like, Chaetomium, Stachybotrys cartarum. The line broke there, like the report itself sighed from the weight of that name. Mom opened the PDF on her phone and read it aloud at the kitchen table. She didn't rush it. She didn't add adjectives. She said the words like a liturgy in a language meant to be both exact and humane. Indoor sample. Stachybotrys cartarum detected, she read, and the world didn't end, but something that had been pretending to be world-cracked. Dad said, "Lots of houses have mold." "Lots of houses don't make their kids cough blood," Mom answered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I learned that day that love can be measured by the questions it asks. Mom's questions were simple and therefore lethal. When did you first see water down there? When did you paint? Why did you run the dehumidifiers on high the week we moved in? Why did you tape the crawlspace vents? She asked each one like she was handing him a key for a lock he was pretending didn't exist. Dad paced like a boxer fighting air. "You want to ruin this for me?" he said. "You want to bring inspectors? You want to lose value? The market is soft. We can't take a hit." I hit record on my phone and set it face down on the table. The screen stayed dark, but the red dot pulsed in my mind. I had been quiet for months, the kind of quiet that makes other people think they are safe. I wasn't quiet anymore. "When did you paint?" I asked. He looked at me, at my mouth, at the paper towel rolled tight in my hand, at the pink spot blooming in the center of it like a flower that shouldn't exist. "After the spring storm," he said, and the words tumbled out so fast he didn't notice they were building a staircase I could climb. There was seepage. Not a flood, seepage. I ran the fans. I washed the studs with bleach. I rolled kills. I ran the dehumidifiers night and day. It's called mitigation. His voice rose at that last word like he'd landed on a legal island. I mitigated. Mom closed her eyes 1 second and opened them steadier than before. "You painted over a problem," she said. "You didn't fix it." "You don't fix water in a week," he snapped. "You control it. You present the space. You let buyers see their lives in the brightness." He was reciting the catechism of flipping, and in that catechism, appearance is salvation. I pressed my palms to the table to keep them from shaking and said, "Your brightness is making me sick." The words came out clean. They didn't even tremble. Sometimes the body saves its strongest voice for when you've exhausted everything soft. He took a step back like I'd thrown something. "You want to blame me for everything," he said. But the shape of the argument had shifted under him, and he knew it. Love can't negotiate with a leak. The oncologist called the next afternoon with a new plan, because the nodes lit up, but the clinical picture didn't fit neatly. He wanted tissue. "We need to know what we're chasing," he said, and scheduled a needle biopsy. He explained false positives and inflammatory uptake, and I clung to those phrases like they were handholds on a cliff. Mom texted Aunt Selma, and we packed a duffel with 3 changes of clothes and the cleanest air I could imagine. We slept on her pull-out couch with a fan whispering cotton candy air and a diffuser fogging eucalyptus into the corners. I coughed twice the first night, and only once the second. A miracle traced not to angels but to architecture and honesty. Dad texted me a photograph of the basement with the caption, "All fixed." In the picture, the floor gleamed like a promise. A new box fan sat where the old one had been. The paint was dry like a difficult man's smile. Mom didn't reply. She was busy filing the report with the county health line and attaching the lab PDF and asking for a case number. She was busy, calling a remediation company, and choosing the one whose estimate didn't read like a fairy tale. She was busy loving me in the most practical way love knows, by believing me and acting. At the biopsy, the radiologist narrated what he was doing because he knew the sound of procedures is its own cruelty. "You'll feel pressure," he said. And he was right. He guided the needle with a calm thumb, while I watched the ceiling and named tiles like stars. Mom counted my breaths with hers and matched me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like we were walking across a street together. The pathology. Report didn't say lymphoma. It said granulomatous inflammation. It said no malignant cells identified. It said words that opened windows. The oncologist leaned back in his rolling chair and let the air enter the room again. We still need to treat what's making you sick, he said. But this is not what we feared. I cried then, but it wasn't the heavy crying that empties a person. It was relief crying, thin as glass, bright as rain on hot pavement. Mom cried in the same key. Dad did not come to that appointment. He had a dryer vent to install across town, he said, where the buyer was on a tight timeline. We returned to the house with masks on and a plan. The remediation crew moved like a practiced orchestra. Negative air machines, plastic containment, HEPA vacuums that roared like lions you could trust. They cut away drywall where Dad had painted over stories and carried it out in bags marked so no one could pretend this was an aesthetic. They sprayed and scrubbed and sealed and dried until the air monitor numbers fell, the way fever falls when the body finally remembers how to heal. Dad watched from the top of the basement stairs with a look I recognized from every poker night he'd ever lost, a tight mouth that pretends what it is losing wasn't worth anything to begin with. This is overkill, he muttered to no one in particular. Mom said, so was pretending fresh paint was a cure. The housing authority inspector arrived 2 days later with a clipboard and a fairness that did not care about anyone's feelings. He checked the sump. He checked the grading outside where the earth sloped the wrong way, ushering rain toward foundation. He cited drainage, downspouts, vapor barrier. He wrote words that meant the problem was real, not just a thing in a girl's head. He asked for my signature acknowledging the report. My hand didn't shake when I signed. The red dot, in my mind, the recording I had taken, lived quietly in my phone, a piece of truth I didn't yet know if I would need.